My name is John Micklos Jr., and I am a children's book author living in Newark, Delaware. I've written more than 50 books for children. I do all sorts of books. I do poetry books, I do picture books, I do nonfiction books on a wide variety of topics, history, social studies, all sorts of topics. And that's really fun because I get to research all sorts of topics and learn about them. I think my favorite type of books to do are poetry books and picture books because they're the most creative. Oftentimes for nonfiction books, the publisher assigns me a topic. And it may or may not be a topic in which I'm inherently interested. Now, typically, I love to research new topics and learn about things. And so I get interested about them, and it's fun to do them. But I think the books that I conceive of from scratch and kind of take the idea all the way through, I think they're probably the most fun to do. I really got started in children's publishing when my children were young, and I love to read to them. And I've always felt that it's very important for fathers to read to children as well as mothers. And so I had an idea for a book of poems about dads and kids that dads could read to and with their children. And I decided to call it Daddy Poems. And I pitched this idea to Boyd's Mills Press, which is the book publishing arm of Highlights for Children magazine. And they loved the idea. And they said, John, go do it. And so they kind of walked me through the process. And this book took like 4 or 5 years to come together because it was such a new process for me. But it turned out really well, and I'm very proud of it. And that was my first real children's book and came out in the year 2000. Right about the time the book was getting ready to be published, my editor called me up one day and said, John, you must be very excited about the fact that Daddy Poems is getting ready to be published. And I told her that yes, I was. And then she asked the question that really kind of changed my life and my career. She said, well, John, what are you going to do next? And I was like, next? You mean I'm supposed to do something else? I thought this was it. What should I do? And she said, well, obviously you were passionate about this project of poems about fathers and children. What else are you passionate about? And so I went and thought about that for a while, and I realized that I'm passionate about families. And so from Daddy Poems came Mommy Poems and Grandparent Poems and No Boys Allowed poems of brothers and sisters. And so what started out as a single book ended up being a 4-book series of poetry books published over a period of about 5 years. I've been writing ever since I was old enough to hold a pencil. I wrote my first children's book was called Tubby the Pig on the Moon, and it was written when I was in 2nd grade. And it was a book about a talking pig and his barnyard friends who built a rocket ship and flew to the moon. And of course, it wasn't the type of book that got published, but it was a 20-page book, which was a pretty impressive, I think, output for a 7 or 8-year-old. One of the most gratifying aspects of being a writer to me is getting to share my work with young people. I go to libraries, I go to preschools, I go into schools and work with students, either sharing my books with them or doing writing workshops. And that to me is tremendously rewarding. It's great for me when I see a young person reading my book and enjoying it. And it's also great for me when I see a young person realizing for the first time that they're a writer too. And a lot of times I go in and sometimes I do poetry workshops. And sometimes some of the students, kind of especially boys, they say, poetry, I can't write poetry. I don't want to write poetry. And they kind of sit down and they start doing something. They start playing with rhymes where they're doing a shape poem about football or basketball or something that they really care about, or a pet, or they're writing about their pet. And they really get into it. And you can see that excitement. And you can see, oh, they really are realizing that they're a writer too. And that, to me, is really heartwarming. I get inspiration from a lot of different places. And my best books come when I'm truly inspired by something. These 2 picture books being maybe the best examples. The idea from One Leaf, Two Leaves, Count With Me came when I was at a writer's retreat up in northeastern Pennsylvania one October. And I happened to be sitting outside and looking up, and the leaves were changing, and it was beautiful. Actually, the leaves were almost all done changing. I looked up at a particular tree, and there were two leaves, only two leaves hanging on the tree. And I watched them for the longest time. I was fascinated by whether they were going to fall off or not. They were the last two. And they didn't, but while I was sitting there, this line popped into my head. One leaf, two leaves on a tree. I was like, ooh, I like that. I can do something with that. So I scurried back to my cabin and sat at my computer. I was like, one leaf, two leaves on the tree. Three leaves, four leaves, count with me. I was like, oh, counting book. And so that evening, by the time I had finished that evening, I had a counting book of leaves growing on a tree from 1 to 10 during the spring, being on the tree in the summer, falling off from 10 to 1 in the fall, laying on the ground in the winter, and then growing again the following spring. So it ended up being a seasons book and a counting book all in one. And basically it wrote itself in that one evening. I mean, obviously I went back and changed things and tweaked things over a period of months. But it really, that was an idea that kind of came pretty fully formed. And that's really special when that happens.